Hello and welcome to my channel. My name's Jo, this is Joey Sewy, and today's video is all about printing onto fabric or even directly onto garments. So this is something I wanted to share with you for a little while because I've been playing around with it. I've got two garments here, one of which I painted last year and one of which I printed last week. And I'm going to tell you, they've both been done by almost the very same method, except this one is brush strokes and this one is printed. Okay, so let's get straight into it. What do you need? You need paint, you need fabric paint medium, you need your garment or your fabric. So this was a garment that I got from a charity shop. This was fabric that I printed and then made into a garment. And you need something to make marks with. Okay, so the paint, you need acrylic paint. So I'll put some pictures up. Acrylic paint is the cheapest stuff you get in a paint shop, an art shop. It is plastic based paint, and it is really robust, and it comes in all of the colours. It's probably the widest range of colours. You can mix them as well, you can mix up your own. So you need acrylic paint, and then you need fabric paint medium for acrylic paint. So that sounds like it might be expensive, but actually the bottle of fabric medium is only about £7 on Amazon, I think. I will put a link down below, but it's not expensive, and acrylic paints can be as little as £1 a tube, so they are not expensive things. This is my bottle of acrylic medium. Liquitex is the brand. I don't know if there are other brands, but this is the one I've used. And it says fabric medium. What this does is you mix this with the paint and it waters it down, and it also makes it stick, makes the paint more likely to take to the fabric. Now acrylic paint would probably stick on any fabric anyway, because it's really evil stuff if you get it on your clothes, but the fabric medium helps to water it down and helps with robustness as you wash it. Okay, so the fabric paint medium I would say is essential. You could try it without, but this method uses the medium. The garment or fabric, so you've got two options. You have got the option of finding a garment you already have, or finding one for 99p in a charity shop like me. So this was a white crepe, probably polyester top, 99p. I loved the shape, but it was a little bit plain for my style, so I bought it with the plan of painting it. Or you could have fabric that is flat or cut out into pattern pieces and then paint it. So I'll tell you about that in the method. And then something to make marks with. So you could use a paintbrush, of course you could, or you could use almost anything. For the blue top, I used a paintbrush. For the green top that I did more recently, I used a fork. And these marks I will show you later on in the video, but as you can see, these marks are made by getting paint onto the back of the fork and essentially printing it like that. So, I mean, the sky's the limit in terms of what you could use. You could use the end of a pencil if you wanted little dots. You could use your hand if you really wanted to, because acrylic paint will wash off very easily from your hands. So anything you can make a mark with. Lino printing blocks, you could use that. So, you know, potato printing will work. Anything you can make a mark with. And so that takes us on to step 2. Once you've gathered your materials, which is paint, medium, thing to paint on, and thing to paint with, which can be a brush or can be something to print with, you need to test out your colours on your garment or your fabric. Now, I know if you're going to be using a garment, that's going to be more difficult, because with this, obviously, I didn't cut anything off it, so I didn't have any chance to practice until the moment that I put the paint onto the garment, which is a bit terrifying. You can't, so if you're using a garment and you're not going to get any chance to practice, same as me, then I would say at least practice on paper. So acrylic paint normally used on paper or canvas, so get some paper, practice with the consistency. So you probably are going to want to possibly water down a little bit the acrylic paint, and the fabric medium makes acrylic paint more liquid, more runny anyway, but you may want to add a little bit of water as well to get it to move well enough onto the garment. But also, as well as that, if you have the opportunity, so if you don't have the opportunity, test it out on paper, play around with the marks you're going to make, see how much pressure you need to use with the printing thing, that sort of stuff. If you're going to do option B, which is to print onto something that you're going to sew up later, you're going to have offcuts. So I'm going to show you video and pictures as I'm going through, and one of them will be of my testing. I tested loads of colours because for this project I didn't know what was going to look good on the green, and on a white background you're going to be fairly consistent with how your colours will work out because it's like on white paper, so you can test that. But on a green background it is going to influence, or on any other colour background, it is going to influence what colour it will come out as. And of course you've got the actual aesthetics of whether you like the colours against each other as well. So if at all possible, test out whether what you like, you know, is the consistency right? Do you like the marks? But also how are the colours going to work once they get onto that fabric? Acrylic paint, this method, it does kind of sit on top, so it doesn't sink in a lot depending on how much water and medium you put in, but it does make a difference compared to if I put this on white or if I put this on paper. I got a slightly different colour, and I will have shown you what it looked like after I tested out all my colours, and that gave me a chance to kind of think, okay, what do I like? Essentially, what's going to work for my project? Which one do I want to use? I went for a dark mid blue and added a little bit of white, so it's kind of, for me, this is a greyish blue, and you may be able to see on camera. To be honest, it tends to come up more on camera than it is in real life, but some of these are darker and some are lighter, and that was actually me changing the paint. Sometimes it's because there's less paint on my fork, but I did also use two colours, which in the end it wasn't super effective because in real life you can barely tell the difference, but it's showing up on camera for some reason. So you've got your you have got your materials, you have tested out if you can, and don't be tempted unless you are absolutely sure to test on the inside of a garment, because as you can see here, it does go through a lot of fabrics, so you wouldn't get away with that because it would show through onto the shown side of your fabric. I'm just going to jump in before we go to the next stage and say, if you haven't pressed like or subscribe and you're liking this video and you'd like to subscribe to my channel, that would be really great. Let's get back to the video. So if you're going to do the option where you're painting onto fabric, what I did next was I laid out my pattern pieces, as you can see, and I laid them out as the pieces were going to be sewn together approximately, so that I could get some sort of pattern matching and consistency along my fabric. Now of course there is another option where you simply print or paint onto yardage, so onto a rectangular full continuous piece of fabric that you're going to cut out later. It's got pros and cons. In this instance I didn't have a lot of fabric left, so I wasn't going to do that because I was really working with scraps anyway. Pattern matching might be a bit more difficult. It might not matter with the pattern that you're going to do. You will end up having to print a lot more area than you need. So if you've got an intricate thing, and this took quite a lot of time to print, so this is not necessarily intricate, but it's very time intensive to do this particular method, but other methods are not. The paintbrush method for me was pretty quick. So it depends on your method, but you could obviously print yardage flat fabric, but it may well be more time consuming, but that might work for you. There's no rules, you do what you need to do. So what I did next was I planned out my pattern placement. So I started off trying to use buttons, and I'll show you a picture. And it felt like that kind of worked all right, although again, it was really labour intensive. But when I started to try and measure between them, and when I got going, the tool that really worked for me was my button gauge. You may have come across these. It's an expanding gauge, which you normally use for example, aligning buttonholes on a shirt when you're making one, something like that. And it, as you might imagine, it was really, really helpful. You don't need one of these, but if you have one, it was really, really helpful to make sure I was getting consistent placement of my motifs across the garment. So that is what I did with this one. With the blue top, I totally did it freehand. So you can do either way. I wanted a bit more of a kind of formal or rigid layout here, and with the blue one, it was more organic. go with what your aesthetic needs. But if you want something that is going to be quite consistent and is going to be quite uniform, regimented, then you're going to need to measure it out somehow or other. You could potentially use pencil because it will usually wash off fabric, but it might not. So use a method that is definitely going to be removable. So the last thing to do before you actually start getting the paint onto the garment is to protect underneath the thing that you're painting. And for example, if you're using a garment, so you've got a double layer of fabric here, front and back, and you can't do anything about that, you're going to have to paint it that way. You need to put something inside the garment, up in here, to protect it from going the front layer essentially seeping through and going onto the back. So I used cardboard, and as you can see on my paint brush strokes, it actually, because it was corrugated, you know, brown cardboard box, because it was corrugated, I got some of that showing through, which I actually quite liked. But if I hadn't liked it, I would have been a bit annoyed because I didn't plan that. So if it matters to you to get a smooth finish, then pay attention to what you use. And brown cardboard boxes is not going to be good enough. You might need some mount board, you might need, I don't know, something else under there. You could be inventive. You could use a plastic bag actually, as long as it stayed flat. And that moves us on to the technique of actually doing it. So technique of actually doing it. If you're using a paintbrush, you just use a paintbrush. With one proviso, you're going to need to hold the fabric as you paint. So you could try and, I don't know, pin the whole fabric down onto one of those foam play squares. I'll have to put a picture what I mean. People use them for blocking out knitting sometimes. If you've got some of those, that would be ideal. But most of us probably haven't got something where we could actually pin the garment down onto the surface. So in that case, you're probably going to use your hands to just stabilise the fabric, do your painting, move on, etc. But it will move as you paint. So just bear in mind it's a bit less well behaved than the average piece of paper in terms of being shifty all around. The flat fabric was a bit easier because I was printing it. So I'm going to show you how I printed it. But first of all, how did I get the paint onto my fork? I got a paintbrush, I dipped it into the paint, and then I actually painted it onto the back of the fork. So I haven't got any paint right now, but I just painted it on. I went to a consistent line, which was really easy to see because it washes off the fork in the end, but when you're using it between prints, you can see where you went to, so you can get approximately the same. Paint it on and put it down, and I'll show you in the video exactly how you print it down. So that's how to do it with a fork. How to do it with different block prints or that kind of thing, it's going to vary. So again, you'll have worked that out in your testing phase, but using a paintbrush to get the paint onto your item that you're going to print with is a really good technique. You can be nice and sensitive with how much paint you get on there. I think with my fork, if I dipped it into the paint, I would have just got too much. I wanted more control than that. And when I was painting it on, I got 3 marks out of each forkful. So out of each forkful, I would get 1, 2, 3 marks, and then I'd have to refill. So you can see that's why it was quite labour intensive. You could potentially water down the paint if it's not going far enough, or if it seems to be a bit gloopy, you can add water to it to help. After you've printed it, and let me just say a little bit about the techniques I use. So you saw when I was testing, as well as trying out different colours, I was trying out different sort of patterns, and I ended up, because this was just a playing around thing, I think it's a relatively wearable top, and I'm going to be telling you about it in my what did I make in June video, which will be out very early July. So I won't talk about the sewing, but because it was just a test, I've ended up with 3 different, maybe even 4 different pattern motifs. So I've got the general idea that I was going for, which was more pattern at the top and less at the bottom, so it gets slightly further apart. Obviously here I was filling in the gaps, whereas here I was leaving the gaps. On the back, the pattern is slightly different. I started with this one, and in the end I decided I didn't like it so much, so I didn't do the front like this. But this is 2 forks, it's crisscross, so there's one going that way and then there's one going diagonally. You can probably see that. And I did a version, I prefer it slightly on an angle like that, but then I printed it like that, and it's amazing actually how much difference to it, in my opinion, about what I liked, it really made. And then on the back I did fill in as well, because I had that idea. I was really genuinely making this up as I went along and just working out what I liked. So I did all of this, and then I did the filling in after I'd done the rest of the body, and then I went back to the back pieces and decided to fill in at the top as well, so at least I had that consistency. Then, to state the obvious, these they're called flanges on the pattern, but these are kind of stick out, slightly ruffly, slightly shoulder paddy things. And as you can see, the stripe there is more consistent, and I did a stripe that way. That is still done with forks. I didn't drag it because I didn't think that would work, so I just said print, 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 print. So you can kind of see how it fades in and out. You can sort of see the different fork marks. So, you know, basically what I'm saying is play around. It is really fun. It might be labour intensive, but that's, to be honest, that was partly the technique I chose and partly what I was going for. I needed accuracy, so it needed to be slow and careful. But you might splatter it. There's no reason why you can't splatter it, as long as you protect your house. It's up to you. So after you've got your paint onto your garment, whatever you do, however you do it, you need to leave it to dry. Now, it actually doesn't take that long. It's going to depend on your fabric, you put it on dry fabric. I haven't said that, but you put it on dry fabric. It's going to depend on your fabric, it's going to depend how much you've used, etc, etc, but generally it doesn't actually take very long to dry. When you've dried it, you will then press it with a press cloth on top. The reason why you must use a press cloth, if you don't know what a press cloth is, this is mine. Mine's made out of silk organza. It's not very big. It's see-through, which in this instance it's not essential that it's see-through, but it can be quite helpful. But before you wash it, some of the acrylic paint will probably melt off onto the base of your iron if you don't use some kind of press cloth. So if you use a tea towel, make sure it's not your best tea towel. If you use a bit of scrap fabric, that would work too. The next thing you do, so it's dried, you've pressed it once, then you wash it. Unless you're going to sew with it and it might fray, but if you can, you then wash it, because it does make quite a big difference. So it adds a bit of stiffness to the fabric, but a lot of that comes out in the first wash. So this, as you can see, it's still really drapey, and it was always drapey. This is linen, and it's a weight that's also suitable for trousers, so it's much more structured. But I wouldn't say it's soft, but that's partly because it's quite new linen. And especially here, where there's a lot more paint versus here when there's a lot less paint. You know, here there's barely any influence on the drape of the fabric at all. Up here there is quite a bit of influence on the drape of the fabric. That's going to vary with your fabric, but it will definitely be influenced by how much paint you shove on there. So bear that in mind as well. But once you've washed it, kind of anything that's on the surface will come out, and certainly in my experience, the ones I've made, after that point it's perfectly fine to iron it without needing to use a press cloth. You might want to err on the side of caution just the first time to make absolutely sure on your project, but for me this one was fine once it had been washed, but before it had been washed it was melting all over the iron, which was not fun. And then if you have not sewn your garment up, you sew your garment up, and that's it. So I hope I have helped you see that it is a really simple process. The most difficult thing about doing it, certainly for me, was just getting brave enough to have a go. I don't know why, because the blue top was 99p. What was I going to lose? And this was scraps for something I'd already finished. So what did I have to lose? I don't know what I was afraid of. So I hope I've inspired you to give it a go. Let me know down in the comments if you've ever done anything like this before. If you do, give it a try. I would love to hear how it works out. And if you want to show me, you can direct message me on Instagram, where I am also Joey Sewing. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time with a summer sewing plans video. And if I have time, another instalment in my room tours. See you then.